Did you know that in the 1990s, the US military was researching a bomb that could turn you gay? The hope was that enemy soldiers would be too busy making love to one another to fight US troops. And if you thought that was insane, in today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're going to be looking at a whole 15 minutes of actually unbelievable US military facts. Number 15. Remote viewing. From the 1970s through the 1990s, the US Army operated a special branch of its intelligence deep inside Fort Meade, Maryland. Known secretly as the Grill Flame, this secret unit came to public attention because of the renowned comedy movie The Men Who Stare at Goats. The secret unit spent years trying to weaponize the paranormal, including remote viewing. According to subscribers of this belief, some people have the ability to close their eyes and visit other places without ever physically going there. Supposedly, the Army felt that there was a lot of promise in the program when several remote viewers gave detailed accounts of a Soviet weapon research facility that turned out to be accurate. Though history will never know if this was simply a lucky guess, we do know from declassified documents that the Army and the Defense Intelligence Agency took this capability very seriously. However, this wasn't the first time the US Army spent a lot of effort on what some might see as a superfluous project. In 1976, the Army launched an entire military operation to cut down a tree. Number 14. Operation Paul Bunyan. On August 18, 1976, a group of American soldiers and South Korean contractors entered the Joint Security Area to cut down a 98-foot poplar tree that was obscuring the United Nations headquarters view of an observation post. Not expecting any resistance from the North Koreans, the unarmed Americans were met by a nearly 20-man-strong North Korean patrol. Without warning, the North Koreans pounced on the group and began beating them with axe handles and then slashing them with axes that the South Koreans had dropped. When it was all said and done, 2 American officers were hacked to death and numerous South Koreans were wounded. This blatant murder of 2 American Army officers infuriated the United States, and so the US decided a show of force was necessary. This became known as Operation Paul Bunyan. 3 days later, over 800 American infantrymen, engineers, and South Korean special forces, along with 27 helicopters and a tank, set out with one mission in mind: cut down that tree. As the operation kicked off, not a single North Korean dared say or do anything, and the show of force went off without a hitch. In the words of one American who took part, the operation, quote, blew the North Koreans' minds, and they did not retaliate. And if that didn't blow your mind, this next military invention will. Number 13. Robot beetles. While most suspected there would not be a world left after a nuclear attack, some thought it was wise to plan for such a case. However, in a world where tons of nuclear weapons just went off, there would be a ton of danger to ground crews who tried to repair bombers that suffered battle damage. So instead of turning a simple repair job into a death sentence, the US Air Force decided to create a robot that could do the job, called the Beetle. But this was no ordinary robot. Standing at 11 feet tall with a reach of 27 feet and weighing 77 tons, the Beetle was basically like a giant armored suit a maintenance worker could wear while conducting repairs on heavily irradiated bombers. The driver would be safe inside thanks to the 1-foot-thick lead plates that cut ambient radiation to less than 1/3000th of what it normally is. Though the Air Force actually built the robot and it apparently performed well during testing, it never entered service. And although the Air Force planned to donate it to NASA, it simply disappeared. But finding this robot on military-owned land is difficult, considering just how much of it the US military controls. Number 12. DoD land. Although the exact number of military bases in the US changes frequently due to base closures and realignments, the Department of Defense is one of the largest landowners in the United States. With more than 750 bases spread across the US and the world, the DoD owns about 25 million acres of land. However, this land is more than just desolate wilderness like Alaska or Southern California, which hosts some of the military's biggest live fire ranges. Between Washington, D.C. and Honolulu, San Diego, and countless other cities, the military owns some prime real estate throughout the country. While the value of the land is unknown, it is certainly worth hundreds of billions of dollars. However, this extremely large number is even bigger when considering just how few people actually serve in the U.S. military. Number 11. Percentage of America who serve. Between the roughly 2.1 million Americans serving on active duty or in a guard or reserve component of the military, these figures represent just 0.5% of the entire U.S. population serving at any given time. However, this number is startling considering that just 7% of the US population consists of veterans, with this number decreasing each day as World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam-era veterans pass away every day. Perhaps most startling about these figures is the divide in American families that serve. It's estimated that approximately 60% of American families have never had a single relative serve in the military. This means that the already low number of people serving is concentrated in a relatively small number of families. Because of the historically low numbers of recruits, the military has been ramping up its efforts to include people who otherwise may not have joined, which can also be a selling point for people who want to keep their sick civilian beards. Number 10. Beards. One of the most common gripes U.S. service members have is that they cannot wear beards. This is pretty silly considering so many other European militaries allow it, and they seem to be doing just fine. But the U.S. military continues to keep its members clean-shaven except for medical reasons. That was until 2017 when a landmark ruling came down. Some religions, such as Sikhs, mandate that the men wear beards for religious purposes. In 2017, a group of Sikh soldiers won a lawsuit against the U.S. government that forced the Army and later all the DoD to allow service members religious exemptions for beards. Because the language in these regulations is not specific to one religion, service members from other faiths like pagans have been allowed to grow beards. But if the prospect of growing a beard in the military isn't enough to get you to join, perhaps the explosive sausage will. Number 9. The Miklik. One of the scariest things a soldier can encounter is a minefield. With every move potentially being their last, soldiers have to be very careful about where they're stepping. Removing mines is tedious and almost impossible while under fire, and that's why the US military came up with a solution. Introduced in 1988, the M58 Miklik is a minefield's worst nightmare. Fitted to specifically modified M1 Abrams tanks, the Miklik is essentially just a giant cord of explosives the tank can shoot out to clear a minefield. With the capability to clear an 8-meter by 100-meter wide section of terrain in one instant, the M58 Miklik is truly an innovative yet simple weapon. And this simplicity is even included in some of America's most advanced weapons, like its nuclear missiles. Number 8. Floppy disks. Securing America's nuclear arsenal is of the utmost importance to the U.S. military. While the physical security surrounding installations that house these weapons is top-notch, the likelihood of a direct attack is low. However, especially in today's day and age, the chance of a cyber attack is quite high, which is why American nuclear missiles are surprisingly low-tech. Deep inside bunkers spread throughout the American West are dozens of nuclear missile silos. Inside these silos, crews maintain a watch 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, to ensure they can fire these weapons if the order ever comes. The computers powering these centers are not the latest MacBook. Instead, they are 1970s-era IBM Series 1 computers that run off of floppy disks. The U.S. still uses such ancient technology because these systems are virtually impenetrable against cyber attacks. And if you might be wondering why the U.S. military cares about cyber attacks, the answer is that less than 20 years ago, a simple USB drive almost brought the military to its knees. Number 7. Operation Buckshot Yankee. Sometime in 2008, an unnamed U.S. service member was walking to their car when they spotted something that made their day. There in the parking lot was an abandoned USB flash drive. Thinking today was their lucky day, the member inserted the thumb drive into their DoD-issued computer the next day. But little did that person know, they were patient zero for the worst cyber attack in U.S. military history. Soon, more than 300 military computers became infected with the virus. Over the next 14 months, in what became known as Operation Buckshot Yankee, the U.S. military worked to rid its systems of the worm. Although the perpetrators have never been identified, many disgruntled service members can thank this person for being the reason they do their annual Cyber Awareness Challenge, which seems to get longer and longer every year. However, the U.S. military has long considered such threats to its information security long before the internet was even around. And this is because in the 1960s, the military conducted an experiment to build a completely new communications network with sewing needles. Number 6. Project West Ford. In the 1950s, the U.S. was concerned that if the Cold War ever went hot, they would have serious trouble talking to their forces in far-flung corners of the globe. This was because long-range communications traveled via underwater cables or bounced off the ionosphere. However, with the Soviets certainly being able to cut the cables, and with long-range comms in jeopardy due to bad weather, the U.S. military wanted a guarantee that it could talk to its forces no matter what. This is where Project West Ford also known as Project Needles, came into play. Spearheaded by MIT, the plan was to send 480 million needles into space that would act like dipole antennas to facilitate worldwide communications. After an unsuccessful first attempt, the MIT team conducted a successful test run in 1963. However, the project was not meant to be. Advances in satellite technology threatened to make the project obsolete before it became fully operational. Additionally, numerous scientific bodies protested the purposeful launching of space debris into orbit. In fact, even with one test run, the International Academy of Astronautics considers it the worst premeditated contribution of space junk in human history. But this wasn't the US military's only zany idea during the Cold War. They also created a backpack nuke. Number 5. Special Atomic Demolition Munition. During the Cold War, the US created a variety of nuclear devices, but perhaps the most unique of them all was the backpack nuke. Officially known as the Special Atomic Demolition Munition, or SADM, this mini nuke had an explosive yield of around 10 to 1,000 tons of TNT. How the military intended to deploy the bomb was to have a Special Forces soldier strap it to his back and parachute them behind enemy lines with a security detail. Once at the target, the soldier would arm the device and run like hell to escape the inevitable mushroom cloud. Thankfully, the world never saw this use as the weapon was phased out in the mid-80s, when the US was entering talks for nuclear reduction with the Soviet Union. However, if such a bomb were ever to be used in combat, it would certainly become a Hollywood movie, and the military would have a direct hand in its production thanks to several special units dedicated to this mission. Number 4. US Military Hollywood Offices. Each branch of the US military maintains an entertainment media office, sometimes known as a liaison or public affairs office. These offices work directly with Hollywood producers for all types of film and TV show projects involving the US military. Most of the time, the relationship between the military and Hollywood is cordial, since these offices give Hollywood direct access to personnel and assets to make films like the most recent Top Gun movie. But sometimes these offices serve as a way for a branch to protect its image. For example, the producers of the famous war movie Heartbreak Ridge initially wanted the main character to be in the Army. However, Army officials did not like the fact that the main protagonist, played by Clint Eastwood, was in a senior leadership position after numerous offenses on his record, like drunk driving and fighting. Not to be discouraged, the producers then asked the Marine Corps for permission, which was immediately granted. The Marine Corps did this mainly because of the film's macho pro-American stance and the Marine Corps' belief in giving second chances. But if you thought that this couldn't be any more American, what US forces did during the invasion of Panama would bring a tear to any American eagle's eye. Number 3. Manuel Noriega. After the US invaded Panama in 1989 to overthrow Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega, the fight to take over the country was swift and violent. Sweeping aside Panamanian resistance, US forces were closing in on Noriega within days of the invasion. Sensing no way out, he sought refuge in the Vatican embassy in Panama City to bide for time. The US troops could not enter the embassy, so they decided they would make Noriega come out. Learning that one of the things Noriega hated more than treating his people right was loud rock music, it was now a race to see who would crack first. Over the next 10 days, US forces serenaded Noriega with a pretty sick playlist of classics like Welcome to the Jungle, I Fought the Law, and We're Not Gonna Take It, among other bangers. Noriega finally gave up and was taken into custody for drug trafficking, murder, and a laundry list of other crimes. But while this story makes the military look pretty good, a little-known accident caused the president to fully cancel a US weapons program. Number 2. The Dugway Sheep Incident. On March 13, 1969, the US military was conducting a series of tests at the Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. The purpose of these tests was to see the efficacy of a new nerve agent called VX that the US had recently weaponized. The tests included firing an artillery shell loaded with the agent, burning 160 gallons of it in an open-air pit, and the coup de grace was an F-4 Phantom spraying the agent over the proving grounds. Though the military considered the tests a success, little did they know its true extent. Just after midnight, the first phone calls came in about thousands of sheep falling over dead. Within 3 days, as many as 6,000 sheep died from what was later confirmed as VX exposure. The military at first contended it was an accident, as the wind must have carried it. However, classified reports later released to the public admitted it was probably a faulty spray nozzle that allowed the VX to keep trickling out after the plane left the target area. Regardless of the reason, the fallout was massive. In fact, the press was so bad that it was one of the main reasons that President Nixon disbanded the U.S. biological weapons program just over 6 months later. But this massive backlash against the studying or stockpiling of biological weapons actually hurt the U.S. military when confronted with a real threat of them being used. This bungling led to one of its most unnecessary operations. Number 1. Operation Kuwaiti Field Chicken. When U.S. troops geared up for Iraq 2.0 in 2003, they found themselves woefully unprepared for chemical defense, with the Marine Corps being especially vulnerable. Because the Marine Corps did not have a detection device small enough to fit on vehicles, the service opted for the next best thing: chickens. Formerly known as Poultry Chemical Confirmation Devices, or PCCDs, the plan was for the chickens to ride in cages atop Marine vehicles. If the chickens just dropped dead suddenly, then the Marines probably knew they were under a chemical attack. The Marines, who unofficially named it Operation Kuwaiti Field Chicken, or KFC, the plan to use chickens failed from the start. Of the 43 chickens sent to Marine units, 41 died en route, or soon after arrival. It's because of this that there are grave sites in the sands of Kuwait and southern Iraq inscribed to the likes of Captain Popeye and Lance Corporal Pecker. Now go watch Weird Weapons of World War II that totally failed, or click on this video instead.